Hey everybody, it's Rebecca with the Connext Exchange, and I am here with Jenn T. Grace to continue the conversation about humanizing others in a polarized world. And Jenn, you just took us on a deep ride to the deep end of the pool, as you said, with the intention to start slow, ankle deep, and then probably in over our heads, but invited people to share stories as a way to navigate this topic of humanizing others. So I'm just curious, you are in the business of elevating voices. You hear a lot of stories from people. And what is it about the storytelling process that really expedites the ability for someone to be humanized?
Oh, well, okay. So it hit me with
Oh,
a nice tough one. Nice tough one off the bat. You know, there's a lot of data that actually shows how we learn is so much better when there's a story involved. So if I just threw a bunch of facts at you, you'd have, some percentage that you'll remember. Or if I tell you a story that embeds those facts, you are much more likely going to remember that. So I think if we even just think about it from just how our brains are wired, that our brains are wired to be receptive to stories and understand stories, just on that premise alone, we can make such a bigger impact and connection point with each other when we just allow ourselves to kind of be vulnerable, let the guard down, and just share, even if it's a very simple story. It can be a surface level story, but it's still going to be at least that one, maybe it's a centimeter step in the right direction versus kind of coming at it in a very, I don't want to say academic type of approach, but coming like trying to convince someone of something by presenting data and facts and all of this, like hey, here's all the things that you should do, when really you can just be yourself and say like, hey, this is who I am and this is what I think. It's just much more effective, in my opinion.
Yeah. And as someone who is a collector of stories, I wonder, was there anything about our conversation today that really jumped out at you? I mean, without using names or anything, but
Yeah. You know, there were some common themes of conversations I find myself in frequently. And then there were a couple of outlier type of stories where I was like, wow, I haven't heard someone talk about this in this particular way. Maybe just in the last year, or maybe at all ever. And so, I think that there's something, just powerful about letting people just kind of share like a little piece of who they are, because some of the folks that were on gave 30 seconds and left us like, well, now what? Like, I need all of the rest. And then other people gave the same 30 seconds and it just like hit you, like really you could like, it was like a gut punch where you could just feel the rawness and the vulnerability of that person even sharing. So that's kind of what stood out to me, is that there was like you could feel it, and then there's others that like it felt like a train hitting you, of like, wow, I cannot believe they allowed themselves to kind of share that in a room of potentially strangers.
yeah. And that sense of community that can be built so quickly, to your point, based on this 30-second story. You asked us to think about, to observe what we heard, and then to notice what we thought about what we heard, and then what we felt about what we heard and what we thought. And that's kind of an interesting layer. I wonder, as you go about your day-to-day life, or how could we use that in our lives to help prioritize humanity in listening to others?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think that we are so busy running from one thing to the next thing, to one conversation to the next conversation, from Zoom to Zoom, phone call to phone call, that sometimes we are having a conversation with somebody and we are so operating on that surface level that we are hearing the words, but we're not actually processing the words that we're hearing. And if we can just flip it, where we focus on what are those words that we're hearing making us feel, or what are we thinking about, that in and of itself can kind of transform our days. And, I say this often, but I feel so fortunate to be, to have the business that I have and to work with the people that I work with. But I hear really hard stories almost every single day. Every single day, there's some, sometimes they're like really tragic and really, really hard to kind of be the container for. And other times they're like what, like shocking, like, okay, like how do I process this while I'm listening to this person? But for me, it's how do I go right into that deep end right from the beginning of that conversation? I talked to a woman who we're now going to be coaching through her book together, and she's telling the story of her daughter who committed suicide when she was 24.
Mm.
And we got to that place like 3 minutes into the conversation. So once you go that deep, that fast, there is no going back to the shallow end. Like you are now in there and you are swimming. So you're able to go even deeper and ask deeper questions and understand how someone might tick on a deeper level. Like I knew nothing about her, but I knew everything about her at the same time. And so if we can think about how can we just be in that space with that person and try to be a container. And I know not everyone has the ability to like really be the container for someone else's emotions, but the more we can just do that, just think of how much different or how differently we could be kind of operating in the world. Because, you know, when I have a call like that, I'm like, all right, now I need to like take some space before I move on to the next conversation. And I always have to kind of build in space because of the level of depth that I get into in conversations versus, you know, like I can feel it when I jump from one call to another. Like I can feel like I didn't have time to actually process or like move that energy like out of my being for a minute, or just kind of like sit and like, oh, like that was a lot. You know, I just heard a really horrible story or a really tragic story, or, but you know, when we can do that, just think of how much more we can humanize each other. So instead of doing the small talk of how's the weather where you are, or, you know, like, how are you having a good day? You know, there's other questions that we can consider asking that might be able to help us like get to that place of intimacy faster, which makes our conversation more impactful.
Yeah, you know, this year I've had the honor of being involved in certain communities where we've said that we've gotten to know each other backwards or from the inside out, where we really don't know the details of each other's days. We don't know job titles, or are we first, second, middle, you know, only children. But we know the people at their core, like a sense of who they are and their energy. And that allows us to extend grace if something is said in a clumsy way.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you experience this, but it feels like anonymity is the enemy of humanity.
That's a great title for something. I think that's exactly what it is. Yeah, like use that for something. I think that's a really great point. Because the more, and my, you know, purpose statement is the more raw and real we can be, the deeper the connections we can experience. And so you cannot have any of that if you're in like some place of anonymity. And so, yeah, I think that I would 100% agree with that statement. So the question then becomes, how do we kind of step into that light, from out of those shadows where we don't want to be seen, or we don't want to be heard, or we've been put in a position where we feel like no one wants to see us or no one wants to hear us? And how do we take those baby steps into that light to just start to show ourselves and start to kind of show up as who we are, to allow people to kind of extend those courtesies to us that, you know, you can't extend something to someone if you don't know that they're there.
Yeah, and to move beyond labels, I guess I relate that to kind of to your point, where in a fast-paced world, we go, go, go. So if I can label you as Democrat or Republican, or, you know, straight or gay, like life's easier. I can blow through, and we just miss out on the gifts of the humans
Yeah.
that are behind those labels.
Well, yeah, because I don't even think any of the labels accurately even describe people. So I might be a liberal, a Democrat, but that does not mean that there are not Republican viewpoints that I don't agree with. And so we're in such a system that doesn't really allow us to have that conversation to say, you know what, I actually do agree on this side for X, Y, and Z reasons. So if you say that, you are going to be torn apart and criticized by, you know, your party. And, you know, even within just being gay, being LGBTQ or straight, like there's a whole spectrum of that too. And so it's not, nothing is really black and white, and everything around us, our society, media, everything wants us to believe that it's black and white, but really there's nothing but gray areas. And so it's a matter of how comfortable are we swimming within those gray areas and exposing, you know, exposing ourselves in those right opportune moments that helps other people say like, oh, you know what, it's not that clear cut, it's not that easy.
Yeah. And you invited everyone on the call to extend an olive branch to someone in their world, to extend some empathy or forgiveness or grace or understanding. I wonder if that feels like a new concept to me. I'm watching this. Like, do you have any guidance of how do I get there? Is it as simple as like pump the brakes, take a breath? Or, is it mustering up courage or bravery? Like, what's a step to get there?
I think it's all of those things and then probably 100 other things. So nothing is clear cut and easy. There's so many and it doesn't have to be hard, but that doesn't inherently make it easy either. So I think to extend an olive branch, there has to be some kind of intention. So you have to be going into whatever that conversation or that dynamic, the relationship, whatever it is, with the intent that I want to bridge the gap, that I recognize that a gap exists and I want to find a way to bridge it. So that's probably the first step, is probably to identify, there's something like a branch needs to be extended. I think that's probably the first place. So it's not even the extension of it. It's noticing that, oh, hey, like there's some kind of disconnect here. How do I at least start that point? And then from there, it's like, okay, I've acknowledged that I need to do something differently because I want to create this relationship, repair this relationship, whatever it might look like. And then it's the bravery piece, because there's like the internal bravery that had to get you to the place where you felt like it was even okay to do this. But then there's the external bravery of actually speaking words out of your mouth, or putting texting somebody, or whatever that might be. And so, I think courage is certainly something that has to be employed quite a bit, because if you knowingly are on opposite sides of whatever situation, but you want to be the bigger person, it's a very risky proposition to go ahead and try to be that bigger person. So to some degree, you have to kind of take a back seat to your own needs in that moment to try to relate to the person that you're trying to connect to at least be like, I might not agree with them, but at least I have to hear them out. And then when we at least get to that, letting our guard down, be like, all right, let me just hear them out. It opens up the door for us to say, well, why do you do it that way? Or why do you think that way? Or how did you come to that place? And that just starts to kind of unravel all of it to get to the heart of what's really there, which is trying to find that common ground between, opposition.
Yeah. And just the way you hosted the conversation today beautifully modeled the power of being an example. So once someone shared, another person felt drawn to share. One person even shared and said, I don't even know why I'm sharing this with you right now. And I think that is humanizing in action, if you will.
It is, because we think that we have to be polished, that we have to have this very well crafted story at the ready that we can just bust out when we need to. But for the person who was like, I don't even know why I'm telling you this, that is more relatable than anything anyone even said on that call, right? Like, it was just like, there's something that's in me. I'm going to say it, whether it makes sense or not. This is what I'm giving you. And I think everyone can relate to that in many different settings of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So a good reminder to, model the behavior that you want to see in others. And, if you want someone to show you part of themselves, like, you go first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Like, we can't just put that expectation on somebody else to be like, Rebecca, I want you to open up to me, and then me not do that. It's like, well, you're not a mind reader. How would you even know that was my intent? Unless I'm like, hey, open up to me, and nobody would approach it that way.
Oh, it was such a good conversation, so rich, and an hour, even 90 minutes doesn't seem to be enough time, especially not for the depths that you brought us to today. So I'm so thankful for your time and your provocation and invitation. Tell me a little bit more about your work and how you work with storytellers and Publish Your Purpose Press, and anything you want people to know about where they can find you and what you're up to.
Yeah, thank you for that. So my company is Publish Your Purpose Press, and we focus on memoirs and nonfiction books. And so that could be, and it's really story driven. So even if you're writing a nonfiction book, it's how do we weave your story into that? And so I have many resources in all different places. So you can go to publishyourpurposepress.com and find all of the things you could possibly need there. But I do have an online community of amazing human beings that's nearing 500 people right now, which is so awesome. And it's the Publish Your Purpose Author Lab, and you can find it on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, for being generous with your time and your life experience. Grateful for our time together today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you all for watching. And I hope that you will join us at a future Connext conversation every Thursday at 11:30 live on Zoom. And until then, have a great week and take care.